And I do think if doctors stopped and got the real information and looked at it themselves, it's not that doctors would be like, oh, vaccines are bad, we shouldn't do it. They would say, oh, interesting. Maybe the people that are talking about this are not as crazy as I thought. Maybe we should look at getting some more of these studies, and maybe we should be able to want to decrease disease and also decrease any potential side effects. Both things can be true, but if you can't actually have a discussion about the risks, then you're never going to be able to make it safer. And I don't feel like medicine's trying to make vaccines safer. They're trying to get more vaccines. And I wish we could just do both.
Welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast, where we provide education and inspiration to help guide you on your journey to look better, feel better, and most importantly, heal better. Hello, and welcome back to the Foundational Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kevin Schultz, and today we are going to tackle a topic that historically has been so controversial that it's considered taboo to even mention. Today we're going to talk about vaccine effectiveness and safety. What tends to get lost in this critically important discussion is all of the people in the middle that don't buy into the safe and effective propaganda, but also don't want to be labeled an anti-vaxxer and blindly do no vaccines without the proper knowledge. These are the people that simply want to ask questions, legitimate questions like, is this vaccine safe for my child? Can I see the safety studies that have been done? What are the ingredients in this vaccine, and are they safe? How do they affect my child? How do they affect me? How effective is the vaccine? And are there legitimate studies that show the actual effectiveness? These should not be controversial questions, and certainly they shouldn't be taboo. These are questions parents should be able to ask their child's pediatrician without fear of being labeled an anti-vaxxer or being kicked out of the pediatrician's office. These are questions adults should be able to ask their primary care physician before they get injected with a COVID booster or the flu shot or any other vaccine for that matter. That is the intent of the podcast today. My guest today, Dr. Joel Warsh, is a board-certified pediatrician based in Los Angeles, specializing in parenting, vaccines, wellness, and integrative medicine. He's the author of Between a Shot and a Hard Place, an amazing book that tackles vaccine questions with balance, data, and clarity. Dr. Warsh also earned a master's degree in epidemiology before completing medical school. He has published peer-reviewed research and has been featured in numerous documentaries, films, summits, podcasts, and media outlets like CBS, Fox, ABC, NBC, CNN, and countless others. And now for my critically important discussion with Dr. Joel Gator Warsh. Dr. Joel Warsh, welcome to the Foundational Health Podcast, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat.
Awesome. Well, I've listened to your new book, absolutely love it, Between a Shot and a Hard Place. I've listened to multiple podcasts now that you've done, and I just want to start off by saying thank you for everything that you're doing to just really open this discussion up, to have an honest discussion, give people really the ammo to be able to ask the questions that they've wanted to ask. And like, not only just as a parent, but, you know, if they have questions for themselves on getting vaccines. So thank you for everything that you're doing. It really is huge.
Thank you. That I really appreciate that. I mean, I never expected to be talking about vaccines, but here we are.
Yeah, I know. I found your story in your book actually really fascinating on how you had gotten to that. And so speaking of questions, I've got a bunch of them, so I hope you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right, awesome. So I would love to start the discussion, and I think this is really good for our listeners to just understand, like, your personal stance. Like, where do you stand on the vaccination discussion, and not only as a doctor, as a pediatrician for your patients, for the parents, but also as a parent yourself and for your own kids and your own family. And so are you a crazy anti-vaxxer?
I don't think so. I mean, sometimes I'm called that, but I mean, yeah. I don't know. I mean, that doesn't even make any sense to me, that term. Like, I'm not anti-car, I'm not a fan of cars that blow up, but, vaccines are a product. And for me, I believe in informed consent. That's the way that I practice, whether you read my book or whether in the office, it's really the same type of conversation. I try to give as much information as I can based on what I know, and then try to help parents make the best decision for them. And people are going to make different decisions. In my office, people do the regular CDC schedule. Some do a slow schedule. Some don't do it. I don't force anybody to do anything. We have discussions. That's kind of my general perspective. I'm not against vaccines. We have them in the office. We do them. I think that they can protect you against certain diseases. I think that, like any product, they can cause side effects. And I think we should be able to discuss that without it being so contentious and anti-vax, pro-vax, evil. I mean, we should be able to have discussions on vaccines and talk about what we know and what we don't know. And that was the reason I wrote the book in the first place, really, was just to be able to have these discussions, because I thought it was just so censored and so extreme, and everything you seem to read about vaccines is like they're the best thing ever or they're the worst thing ever. And I don't think that most things are in the extreme, and I think most parents are not in the extreme. I feel like most people are in the middle somewhere, and they really just want to protect their kids and they want them to be healthy, and they're confused because they get a lot of conflicting information, especially around vaccines, which you say that word and everyone seems to go crazy.
Yeah, so true. I've been in practice for 26 years, not as a pediatrician, but as a chiropractor. And for those 26 years, I've been doing workshops on every topic, including vaccines. And that is exactly what I find. Most people are somewhere in the middle. And ultimately, it comes down to they just want what's best for them. They want what's best for their kids, which is why I think this is such an incredible discussion, and why I was so excited to have you on, because that is your stance. And it's always really been my stance as well. Part of that discussion, I think, is really like most parents assume that doctors get a massive amount of training when it comes to vaccines, that any information that they're getting from their doctor comes from all of the training that they got at medical school. Now, I know, because I married a baby vaccine rep of all people, but I know that that's not true based on what she told me. But what can you tell us about that? What kind of training did you get in medical school? What kind of training do most doctors get on vaccines?
Yeah, that's very true. You really don't get a lot of training on vaccines. I didn't really think about it at the time. I came from a very traditional background. I wasn't particularly holistic minded when I was growing up. I mean, I was fairly healthy, but wasn't really major thought in my mind. And when I went to med school, I did a great pediatric residency at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. I mean, very Western minded. And you get taught about which vaccines there are, the horrible diseases, how few of these diseases we see anymore. The vaccines are the best thing ever. This is why we don't see these anymore. Here's your schedule, go do it. And you don't get taught a lot more than that. A lot of the training is more around what the schedule is, not so much about all the background details about vaccines, history, that kind of stuff. And I didn't really realize that till after. I mean, I certainly didn't think about it at all. You just kind of go do your schedule and that's that. But when I started in practice, especially having an integrative practice, I realized very quickly that parents have a lot more questions about vaccines. And as I started to get those questions, I realized I didn't really know the answers to any of them. I mean, I never really looked into it myself. You just kind of take it as as gospel or whatever. Like when you're taught, you're like, oh, here's what's been done. There's so much research on this. They're safe and effective, whatever the words that you're told. And so you just take it to heart that that's true. And you don't necessarily go look at it all yourself. And so realistically, you don't get a lot of training in med school. You really are just trained that it's been researched. We know for sure these things are safe and effective. And you just kind of parrot that moving forward. And unless you really look into it yourself, you don't really know what that research is. And so that is the reality of where we stand. And it was only after I started really looking into it that I realized I actually have a lot more questions. Like I was surprised at many of the things that I was finding or not finding, and things that I were told that was so clear and definitive didn't seem that clear and definitive to me anymore. And again, I'm not against vaccines. I just was confused because some of the things that were taught didn't seem to be true. And so I was surprised that I couldn't find some of the stuff that I thought I would find. And unfortunately, it was such a censored topic. It was something you couldn't really talk about online socially for the last decade or so. I mean, it was hard to do. And if people did it, they kind of got their platforms taken away. And when COVID hit, throughout those few years, I got very frustrated and I decided, you know what, like I feel like I do really want to look into this. I really do want to talk about it. I think it's really important to speak about it because it was very clear that there were things coming out from public health that didn't make any sense from anything I'd ever been taught. And so I really did feel like I wanted to discuss it, but that's what really led me to write the book, because I wanted to talk about it, but I felt like if I was going to talk about it, I had to be as educated as possible, because obviously it's so contentious that whatever you say is going to be construed in all sorts of different ways, regardless of what you do. But at least if I could be as educated as possible, then that's going to at least help me bridge the gap to have conversations. And thankfully, it's a little different time now. We can talk about it, which is nice, without getting censored. But I just think it's very interesting to look back and to realize how little we're actually taught.
Yeah, and do you think your background as not only a pediatrician, but as an epidemiologist, is that, because obviously a lot of doctors are getting the same questions that you get in your practice, but they respond with, kicking people out of their practice that ask those questions, or getting angry at parents for asking those questions. So is it just kind of how you're built that you, like for you, didn't make you angry, made you want to dive into it more? Or does some of that come from your background in being an epidemiologist besides being a pediatrician?
Yeah, I think there are kind of two questions there. So the first one, in terms of epidemiology, I think that actually turned out to be very helpful when it came to this. I mean, I did that before med school, so I didn't really realize why it would be helpful until now. But epidemiology is really the study of public health, research, statistics. So I had the opportunity back then, especially, to write research papers, to do literature reviews. So I certainly have a good understanding of how to look at the research, how to interpret it, how to synthesize it, what to look for. I mean, that's very helpful from that standpoint. So I think that is really helpful now when discussing it, when writing a book on this topic, because I've already gone through the literature before on different topics. And so I at least can feel a little bit more comfortable that when I go through it, at least I'm hopefully doing it in a rigorous enough way that it's reasonable, that if I'm making a conclusion or not finding something, then it doesn't really exist. I mean, you're always second guessing yourself, but I think that makes it be a little more comfortable to do it, just because I know the way that it's really supposed to be done. So I do think that matters, but I also think maybe I'm I'm a little different in the sense that I'm more curious. I don't really necessarily have a specific bias to anything. I mean, I think we all bias based on what we're taught, but I'm totally fine changing my mind or looking into things. And vaccines was nothing that was ever on my radar or something to even be curious about. But I think after marrying my wife, who's very holistic minded, it opened up my eyes to the holistic world. And after just listening to parents and listening to stories and being asked questions, and on social media being asked about vaccines every single day, it just really led me to be curious, because I really feel like what I'm seeing with my own eyes and what people are telling me doesn't always line up with what we're taught. And ultimately, I feel like our goal as a doctor shouldn't be to push a product. It should be to make sure that kids are healthy. And so, especially when it comes to the risks around vaccines, I just have a lot of questions, and I'm not sure what the answers are. I'm still not sure what the answers are, because I don't think the research has really ever been done to truly answer those questions. And so for me, if it's something that we're giving more and more kids, I think it's reasonable that we should be able to ask those questions. And oftentimes the people asking it turn doctors off, so that we're never moving the conversation forward. And so I'm hopeful that by doing it in a more scientific way and not saying, oh, vaccines are the most horrible thing ever, we should never vaccinate, that can move the needle forward. And I feel like it has on that a little bit, because I have been able to have discussions with a lot of doctors, mainstream doctors, and they've been more open to having that discussion and more willing to listen, because I think they don't automatically assume, not everyone automatically assumes I'm an anti-vax crazy person. Even though I'm called that sometimes, it is weird when you're like, well, you're calling me an anti-vaxxer, but what about the kids I gave vaccines to this week? Like, what about the vaccines I've had in my life? Like, I'm obviously not against vaccines totally, right? But I can still have questions.
Why do you think, everything that we're talking about right now is about how this is such a polarizing discussion for so many people? Why is that? Like, is there a history to that? Like, how did it become so polarizing? Where, certainly having a discussion with certain doctors on prescriptions or medications can at times be polarizing, but not to the extent that vaccines is. So why did this become taboo and polarizing?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of converging factors, but ultimately it's something that's just been ingrained in the culture so much, as like, this is one of the things that we've done to improve public health so much. And I think doctors just feel so strongly about vaccines, and we're taught, just like I said, we're not necessarily taught the background research. We're just taught that these are the best things ever, and anyone that isn't is kind of a crazy anti-vax lunatic. And so there's this almost religion around it. And I think there's also a big financial push. I think that there's a massive bias that we don't even realize as physicians, because pharma is just so huge, has so much money. They fund so many things. They fund the news and the politicians and the med schools and the journals. And so we don't even see that bias kind of creeping in over time. And we don't, I think, have really a good understanding of the other side of the vaccine literature. Anytime anything shows a problem, it seems like it just kind of gets swept under the rug, or those people are crazy anti-vaxxers and the things get retracted, or it never even gets into a journal. And so the only things that you hear as a doctor are the positives, and the only thing that gets published are the positives, the good studies, and never anything that has a concern around vaccines. And so I think there's just been this continuous push. And it hasn't really, I mean, it's been there. There's been an undertone of people that are somewhat concerned about vaccines. But I think with social media, and especially now with the fact that you can be a little bit more open with it, we're starting to see that there's many, many more people that have concerns. And certainly COVID, I think, galvanized what was already occurring, maybe threw some gasoline on a fire. There was certainly skepticism of public health and medicine, but the pandemic really pushed that forward because people just got to see in real time what was going on in messaging that didn't really make any sense to them. And that made everybody question everything. And this is the first time we had social media. You could hear things, you heard the messaging, you heard safe and effective. Anybody who really thinks about things, you could be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, how could something be safe when it's new? Like, you just don't know that. You can certainly say something like, based on the research that we have, we feel like it's effective. We recommend it. We haven't seen any safety signals yet. It's only been 3 months, so we don't know if it's going to cause any problems 10 years down the road, but we can't know that, so we recommend it, but we just don't know. Like, that would be honest, and then you just don't force people to do it, and if they want to take it, great, and if they don't, they don't. But it was, I guess, proposed as something that's we know is safe, which doesn't make any sense. And then things like natural immunity didn't count, which also made no sense, because natural immunity always seems to be better for a disease. If you actually get the disease and you don't die, then you should have better protection. So a lot of these things just didn't make sense to people. And then over the years, you see, okay, well, no, it doesn't actually stop transmission. Okay, you actually can get myocarditis. Oh, we're seeing new safety signals. It's not working as well as it was promised. And then a lot of people had reactions, had a friend that had a reaction, didn't work like it was supposed to. They couldn't go to work. They were forced to do it. And then they started to say, okay, well, if I was forced to do this, if this is what you're saying about this vaccine, what about all the rest of the vaccines? And so people are a lot more skeptical of, I think, government and pharma and public health. And now they're questioning everything. So now we're here because I think medicine has pushed everybody so far on this, just do it just because. And that's not really working anymore. And medicine hasn't caught up to the fact that they actually need to have discussions about this as opposed to just forcing people to do it. So I think that's why we're here now, where you have this pushback, because that's all you can do. You can just force people to do it. But if you start to dive into the data, you don't always have the data to back it up. And that's what I think the people who have been pushing for so long have been saying, like, just show us the research. I don't think it exists.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, I think it's one of the great things that came out of COVID is for those people that are critical thinkers, as I always call them, for the people that were able to think for themselves and not just buy into the safe and effective mantra, and that's where it begins and ends. I think that is exactly right. Like, they started to ask questions like, yeah, some of this stuff just doesn't make sense. And so let's dive into the safe and effective part a little bit, because that's probably the biggest question that I get from people, because they're constantly hearing that mantra. So, you know, some people, like, it doesn't matter. That's all they need to hear. They hear safe and effective, and if big pharma and the government's recommending it, they'll inject anything into their bodies. And then there's the polar opposite end of that. But where do you stand on that? Like, what is the vaccine safety science? What does that look like? Are there proper studies that have been done, that are being done, in your opinion?
Yeah, and that's obviously a complex question, but to start, anyone that would say something like safe and effective, it's propaganda. That's a statement. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how you evaluate things. Nothing is 100% safe and 100% effective. You have to weigh the risks and the benefits. So you really should be talking about risks versus benefits, not safe and effective. You can say, here's the research that we have, here's how effective it is. Nothing works for everybody, but that's okay. You're not necessarily expecting it to, and nothing is safe for everybody. But what does safe even mean? I mean, there are different kinds of side effects. And then the question is, well, what are you studying? For how long are you studying it? Are you studying it in conjunction with other things? So of course, there is some research, right? Absolutely, they study vaccines, and there's lots of research on vaccines. But you have to look at what that research is, what they're looking at, and what they're not looking at. And when you dive into the research, I mean, the first thing you're going to look at is, okay, what kind of studies did they have before a vaccine comes out, right? And most of that research is done by the companies, right? I mean, that's just something that's a reality. It's not right or wrong. It's just the truth. And usually when a new product's going to come on the market, whether it's a medication, a vaccine, whatever it is, the company who's creating it is going to do that research. So obviously they have some bias, right? And that doesn't mean they're doing anything nefarious or evil or doing anything wrong, but they probably have every incentive to make the product look as good as possible and decrease any sort of side effects that you might see. And they certainly do set up their trials in that way. And if you go back and you look at the vaccines on the schedule today for kids, the studies are very clearly set up in a way to minimize the potential to show safety signals. And most studies that you get are short. So they're a few months, maybe a year or two if you're lucky. But now we have a major concern around chronic disease. And so it's not an unreasonable question to say, well, we have this skyrocketing rates of chronic disease, allergies, autism, autoimmune conditions, neurodevelopmental concerns. Are vaccines related to that in any way? That's a reasonable question. Doesn't mean they are, doesn't mean they aren't, but that's a reasonable question. And those studies were never meant to pick up those kinds of issues because they weren't studying kids that long, and they don't study vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. They study kids that are getting all their regular vaccines plus or minus the one that they're studying, or they're studying one vaccine versus another vaccine. There's ethics involved and other things, but that's just how they study it. So it doesn't specifically answer the questions of chronic disease, long-term illness, like I think what most parents want to know. So when you say something is safe, it's relative to what you know. And you can say, well, this vaccine isn't seemingly causing more problems than this other vaccine, so you can call that safe, and that may very well be true, but that still may mean that as opposed to nothing, you have a higher risk. And so to me, it's about balancing those risks versus those benefits. And I think for vaccines, I think we have a pretty good understanding of the benefits. I think we know how common a disease is. We know how severe that disease is. We can know in general how much you would decrease your risk of getting that disease or having serious side effects. Like, I think we have pretty good research on that. We have, I think, decent research on short-term side effects. So we know you get a vaccine, you have a risk of a fever and a seizure and arm pain and rash and swelling, like those kind of things. But I don't think we have great research on the long-term risks, and certainly on cumulative risks. So all the vaccines together, how does that affect you long-term? We haven't really studied that all that much. The only studies we have are, I would say, not the best. They're not vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and they're usually retrospective, looking back in time instead of prospective. So we don't have that really great research to actually be able to answer the question in the way that I would love to be able to answer it. And so you're now making a decision without that. And I think that's actually really important when you have this chronic disease epidemic, to have an understanding of how it affects you long term. To me, the answer still is I don't know. I don't know. It depends. If vaccines have nothing to do with long-term chronic illness, autism, everything like that, that's very different than if it does. And even if it increases your risk by 5% of chronic conditions, that changes the equation a lot, because most of these diseases are very rare. So you are asking to take a very small potential benefit where you may have a reasonable risk from that vaccine. And it's not just one vaccine, it's 20, 30 vaccines. So even if it is 1 in a million risk of serious complications, which I don't think that's true, I think it's more, but let's just say it's 1 in a million. It's 1 in a million times 1 in a million times 1 in a million, 30 times. And that very quickly becomes, 1 in 10,000 risk of a serious complication, or 1 in 1,000. And those numbers start to become meaningful. So I think that if we were honest with parents about that information, then that would move the discussion forward, and maybe that would push medicine to start to get some of those studies that I think could be obtained and may be able to help answer the questions a little better.
Part of our mission at Foundational Health is researching and partnering with wellness products that we trust. Our one-stop health shop is loaded with brands that we not only have extensively researched, but also trust and use ourselves. You can find everything from low EMF, red light therapy devices, grounding mats and sheets, non-toxic mattresses, saunas that help you detox faster without toxifying you, the best water and air filtration systems on the market, high-quality supplements and foods, exercise and fitness products, our favorite books, and so much more. Go to foundationalhealth365.com, click on Health Shop, and you'll find the links to countless products that you can not only trust, but also many that we have discounts set up just for you. Now let's get back to the podcast. So I heard you on another podcast, I think it was the Model Health Show, if I remember right, where this was really surprising to me. You talked about the double-blind studies and the placebo versus a real vaccine. And could you describe that a little bit? Like what I was shocked about was like how you talked about how the placebo wasn't necessarily a placebo.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is super interesting stuff that I would never know, because when you hear the media, they're like, oh, yeah, every vaccine is studied against placebos. The definition, at least of what I was taught of a placebo, is an inert substance in the body. So something that doesn't have any effect on you. And basically salt water, saline, that's what you would consider a placebo. In the majority of studies that pharma uses, especially pre-licensure, looking at safety, they're placebo. So they use the word placebo in air quotes, right? So they use the word placebo so they can say it's a placebo study, but the placebo is something else. So the placebo is another vaccine, or it's some of the ingredients in a vaccine. So it's not an inert substance. So yes, they are doing a placebo, if you air quote it, but a lot of the studies don't actually use placebos. And if you go back and you look at the vaccines on the market that we give to kids today, really none of the vaccines on the market were ever initially studied against an inert placebo before licensure for safety. So it's nuanced because there's arguments around this, but if you go back and you look at DTaP and Hep B and Haemophilus and pneumococcus and all these vaccines that we give our kids today, the original studies were not done against an inert placebo for safety. There are some that looked at efficacy, so that looked at how well they work against placebos. There's some later studies that were done with an inert placebo. COVID vaccine, they did a few inert placebos. So it's not like it's never been done. And there are some vaccines around the world that we don't use here that have been done in that way. But the safety studies for kids generally are done against another product. And the reason why that's important is when you're looking at safety, the best way to study safety would be to look at the product versus an inert placebo. Why that is? So imagine if you do a study, you're looking at a vaccine, and you're studying one vaccine versus another. And in both groups, you get 10 seizures. You're like, okay, well, I guess that's normal, 10 seizures. So therefore, there's no safety concerns because both groups had 10 seizures. But if you did a study where you had vaccine A versus vaccine B versus inert placebo, and you had 10 seizure, 1 seizure, you can see how that's very different, right? Yeah. And so by not using an inert placebo when they're doing blinded trials, that is one way that pharma can rig the deck to potentially hide or potentially kind of wash away any sort of safety issue that might come up. That doesn't mean there is a safety issue. It doesn't mean it's nefarious, but if they're allowed to do it, which they've always been allowed to do it, they don't have to do safety testing against placebos to get their product licensed. And so you may have safety issues that you don't actually know. And that concerns me because I don't know how it's anti-science to say, well, if I'm going to inject something into my kids, especially a new vaccine that's never been on the market, I would expect they would study that against inert placebo for 5-10 years, however long possible, to know the best safety. Like, why wouldn't we want to know that? That's what I would expect had been done, but that is not how it's been done. That's surprising to me.
Yeah, it's so surprising. And I think that's really honestly surprising to most people. Sadly, probably won't have too many of the safe and effective people listening to this podcast. But I truly believe, because I've had plenty of these discussions with those people, I'm capable of not getting angry. I'm capable of having a very civilized discussion with people. And I truly believe that if they knew that those studies hadn't been done, they would also question some of the science because some of the science doesn't exist. So I do think that's a huge, huge important part of this. And how much of all of that?
I'd say before you go on, because I totally agree with you. I think that's an important point. I agree. I think most doctors don't know these kind of things. I think that most doctors don't know what the actual research is. and they only hear what they hear, and they hear, oh yeah, it's been placebo studied. It's the most studied products ever, because that's what I heard and that's what I thought. And it's not like I was just trying to give kids vaccines because I just want to evilly harm kids or something that sometimes people think. It's like, this is just what you're taught. And unless you actually know the research, you're not going to necessarily change your mind. And I do think if doctors stopped and got the real information and looked at it themselves, it's not that doctors would be like, oh, vaccines are bad, we shouldn't do it. They would say, oh, interesting. Maybe the people that are talking about this are not as crazy as I thought. Maybe we should look at getting some more of these studies, and maybe we'll see what we find. Like, I don't know why there's an issue with, I know why there's an issue, but there shouldn't be an issue with doing these studies. We should be willing to find whatever we find. Because if you do find a problem with a vaccine, if you do find that it increases, let's say, asthma or allergies, wouldn't you want to know that? Like, I think doctors would want to know that. They wouldn't say we should never vaccinate again. They would say, okay, why? Like, what is the reason why it's increasing, let's say, asthma? Is there an ingredient? Is it the way that we're doing it? Is it a specific vaccine? Because maybe you can change it. Maybe you could remove that ingredient. Maybe you could do it differently. And we should be able to want to decrease disease and also decrease any potential side effects. Both things can be true. But if you can't actually have a discussion about the risks, then you're never going to be able to make it safer. And I don't feel like medicine's trying to make vaccines safer. They're trying to get more vaccines. And I wish we could just do both.
Yeah, and I think you're dead on with the doctors. And it's not like they're trying to do evil things to children. Like, that would take an awful person. It's just they're going off what they're taught, and most of them don't know that these studies actually haven't been done. And I found that to be true when I met my wife 17 years ago, and at the time, she was a baby vaccine rep for GlaxoSmithKline. It just so happened, like, right after I met her, we started dating. I was doing a workshop on to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, and presenting a lot of the information that I knew, certainly nowhere near to the extent that you have in your amazing book. But when I started talking about those things, like, then after the workshop, she had all these questions like, no, you're wrong. Like, the studies have been done. Well, thankfully she was open-minded. She asked their head scientist, she actually took him to lunch and said, hey, this is what I'm hearing. And she, like, basically her entire world crumbled around her when she started finding out, like, holy cow, yeah, these studies haven't been done. This mantra that I'm told the doctors to tell their patients on this is why, and don't worry about it, it's safe and effective, like, all of that started crumbling around her, which is why she, why we're married. And honestly, that was one of my favorite parts of your book. I love hearing the story of, like, where people were and how they got to where they're at now. And so hearing the story of you meeting, my wife's name is Sarah also, and meeting where, you met your wife, Sarah, and her being holistically minded. I thought that was really, really cool to hear that story, and just to hear the type of person you are, that, you were also open-minded enough to say, like, all right, let's have a discussion about this. I don't really know the answers.
I think medicine's not very humble. I mean, that's just a problem, I think, in medicine in general. It's like, this is what we're taught, this is the way that it is, and this is correct forever. And it just doesn't make any sense. Like, that's not what science is. And you can wholeheartedly believe in vaccines and think they're the best thing ever and think that everybody should get all the vaccines. That's totally fine. But science is about evolving those preconceived notions. The whole point of the research is to say, okay, well, we have this thing that we think is true. I don't think it's true. Let me try to see if we can test that theory. And if a vaccine is safe, then over time, you do more and more studies, it's going to show that it's safe. It's going to show that it's effective. There's no reason you should be afraid of that. There's no reason to push back if somebody says, well, I believe that vaccines cause autism, so therefore, I want to study it. There should be no reason why you can't do that. You can do a study, and if it truly doesn't have anything to do with it, it's going to show that. That's fine. And maybe one study won't, but if you do more and more studies and better studies, you should get to the truth. And that's the point of science, is to keep reevaluating things, and that's how we find new things. People think something is one way, and then somebody who's kind of, like, oh, you're crazy, what are you talking about? And they actually find something that you didn't expect, and then the science changes. I mean, that's how it's been forever. And for whatever reason with vaccines, you can't do that. You can't discuss it. You can't study it. If you find anything, it gets discredited right away. And so we can't move the needle forward. And we see that in studies like the Henry Ford study, where you had a very pro-vaccine doctor, infectious disease individual, head of Henry Ford, infectious disease, perform this study and find, potential issues with vaccines and more chronic disease in the kids that are vaccinated, and then not publish it. And Henry Ford comes out and says, "Oh, the data is bad." And that doesn't even make sense. Like, he literally said on camera that he didn't want to publish it because he was afraid for his career. Usually, locations don't, shut down research because they think the data is bad. That's what their data is. And if they thought there was a problem, then you say, okay, well, here's what the problem is. Here's how we fix it. Let's adjust it before we publish it. But they didn't even get put into peer review. And then you can say, oh, well, you can just discredit that because it wasn't peer reviewed. Well, yeah, but why wasn't it peer reviewed? Why wasn't it submitted? Why wasn't it discussed? And yeah, the data could be bad, could be wrong, it could be flawed. I don't know. Maybe that's why they found what they found. But that's the whole point of doing peer review, and that's the whole point of research. You try to find the flaws, you point out your limitations, which they did quite well. Their study is very good compared to most of their studies that I've seen. So I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be peer reviewed and published. And then you say, okay, well, we found this thing we didn't expect to find. Is that true? Okay, well, let's do it again. Let's do it in a different place. Let's do it in Harvard. Let's do it in Denmark. Let's do it in Sweden. Let's see if we find the same thing. Let's see if we adjust these other confounders that we weren't looking at in this study. Let's do it better. And maybe you do another study and you find the same thing, and then that makes you question, what you found. Or you might be like, no. Look, this is the reason why we found this in this study, because we had some bad data here. That's fine. I don't care. I don't care what the answer is. I just want the actual truth. But it just seems like any time a study like this comes out, it just doesn't come out. Like, either it doesn't come out or it gets discredited. And so you don't have one side of the research, which is the vaccine safety research. And that doesn't move the needle forward, and you can't sue pharma companies. So then there's no way to hold them accountable. They just try to keep the status quo continually because they have no reason to make vaccines better, because you can't sue them. So they're just making money without any liability. And right now they are in charge because they have all the money and you can't do anything about it.
So the study that you're referring to, the Henry Ford study, for people that aren't familiar, there's a documentary, The Inconvenient Truth, done by Del Bigtree. Am I right in saying that?
Right. Yep.
My wife and I had a awesome opportunity last year to sit down at a lunch with Del and pick his brain on that and kind of see the behind the scenes. And it was really just incredible to hear. And that was one of the things that I was going to ask you. So really appreciate you bringing that up. And, you mentioned there's no reason to not do these studies, which logically that makes sense. But I'm guessing that the reason these studies aren't done is because of the conflict of interest between Big Pharma, FDA, CDC. Would you agree with that? And then what can you tell us about that conflict of interest?
You would think that when you have somebody like Secretary Kennedy, who mainstream is like, oh, anti-vax crazy person, trying to be an anti-vaxxer, the first thing that you would do would be to take your big databases, look at the vaccinated kids and the unvaccinated kids. You could do it quite quickly with databases that already existed. And then you would say, look, we have 10 million kids here. The vaccinated kids are just as healthy as the unvaccinated kids. But those studies don't exist. You can't find that anywhere. You cannot find them. They haven't been done. So there's only two answers there. Either it has been done and they didn't find they didn't like what they found, so they didn't publish it. Or they just really didn't think that it was even necessary to do it, which makes no sense because doctors feel so strongly about vaccines that would be the first thing that you would do. Would be in the front page of the New York Times. So I think there's a lot of pressure to not publish anything controversial about vaccines. I think in the mainstream media they're all funded by pharma, so they're not going to generally promote anything that creates hesitancy against their big donors. And there's always a push against it. And I think there's just a lot of push in general from the community, because if you do post something like that, then a lot of the practitioners that have been discredited. They've lost their career. They get a lot of pushback on that. So people just don't do it. And I think so there's just a fear of even looking into that kind of research. And if you do find something, then you might get discredited. You might lose your license, whatever it is. And so people shy away from doing that research. So I think there's multiple pushes away from doing it, like we saw in that movie where the guy did the study and then he was like, oh, well, I just don't want to publish it because I'm afraid for my career. And I think a lot more of that happens than we really realize. But I don't think most doctors know that. How would you know that unless you are looking into this? You just think there's all this research and you don't realize there's this undertone. And if I was pharma, that's what I would do, right? I mean, if my hundreds of billions of dollars were on the line, it's not that you have to do anything nefarious. It's that if somebody publishes something bad about your product, well, what are you going to do if you have unlimited funds? You're going to do everything possible to discredit that person or that study because you want to do that. You're going to publish a different study. You're going to publish a study showing the opposite. You're going to publish a better study because you have hundreds of billions of dollars. You're going to find something wrong with that study. You're going to find something wrong with that person. You're going to do whatever you can to make sure your shareholders keep making their money, because that's your job. That's a business's job. Our job is to keep them in check. Their job is to make more money. So it's not evil. It's like if you work in some company and you're like, oh, this person's trying to discredit us. Well, you're going to just try to discredit them back. You're going to try to be like, well, I don't agree. And that's not evil. That's just what they're going to do. So I think that's what's been done. And there's no checks and balances on pharma right now, or very little at least. And especially when it comes to vaccines, because you can't sue them, they really don't have any checks and balances. And it's really a very unique product compared to almost anything else that we have, because anything else, really the main check is that if the product kills you or causes problems, you can sue them. And they don't want to be getting sued for hundreds of billions of dollars. So they change the product, make it better, study it as much as they can. For vaccines, they don't have that pressure. So there isn't really necessarily a reason to make them better or to even worry about safety, as long as they can get their product on the market.
When it comes to improving your health, you've heard me say many times, test, don't guess. Well, I'm excited to announce that here at Foundational Health, we can help you do just that. Introducing the Foundational Health Blueprint, a very simple at-home lab test and natural wellness program giving you a complete look at your energy pathways, nutrition, stress and mood, the impact of toxic buildup, gut health, and more. If you're looking for one lab test to give you a clear picture of your overall wellness, this is the one. With this test and personalized guidance from our team, you'll have the education and inspiration you need to look better, feel better, and heal better. Go to foundationalhealth365.com, click on lab testing, and order your Foundational Health Blueprint today. And I think that's something that the average person doesn't know, that there is, well, first of all, you don't have the ability to directly sue a pharmaceutical company for a vaccine injury, but then also people don't realize that there's a federal court system set up for just that. And I don't know the exact number, maybe you do, but I believe there's like billions and billions of dollars that have been paid out to people for those vaccine injuries.
Yeah, I mean, these are the kind of things they don't teach you, right? And I had no idea about this until I started researching it myself. But it's really important, and it's really interesting to learn that you cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer. In the 1980s and 1986, well, in the early 1980s, there were more and more concerns around vaccines, especially the DTP, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine, and neurological complications. And so there were all sorts of lawsuits going on. And many of the companies who were making vaccines were concerned that there were just so many lawsuits that they were going to go out of business, and it just wasn't financially beneficial for them to make vaccines anymore. So a lot of them stopped making vaccines. And at that time, the government decided that vaccines were beneficial and we need to protect these companies. And so what they decided to do was they created a liability shield. And basically, if you have an injury from a vaccine, you would sue the government and not the actual company. So you don't sue the company in general. If you have a vaccine injury, you would sue the government. There's a special program that you would go through. And if it's deemed that the vaccine caused that injury, which is very tough to win in that court because it's very narrow. But if you do, then the government would pay you a certain amount of money for that injury. And that's just how it works. So the companies don't actually have liability like normally, where if you took some medication and you had some side effect and they didn't disclose it to you or it caused some issue, then you can sue them. And that's obviously happened before many times, and many products have been taken off the market because they find something later that they didn't disclose, like cause a heart injury or whatever it is, and you can sue them for that. So they don't have that with vaccines.
I don't know enough about this. I'm not sure, if you have a good answer for this. But one of my thoughts, because there are people that, of course, have won those cases, have been and paid out, large sums of money that have proven in that court that their child was vaccine injured. One of my theories has always been because there's always the question of, okay, well, why can one person get a vaccine? And you see this actually with twins a lot of times. Like one child gets a vaccine and seemingly no, at least short-term side effects. The other child seemingly regresses into whatever it is, some sort of neurological disorder, has some major seemingly side effects that are then proven in the court. Does some of that come down to glutathione levels in the body and the body's ability to detox some of those toxic ingredients that are in there?
I mean, I'm sure that it does. I don't think we really know, right? I mean, we don't study vaccine injury very much, so I don't think we don't have a lot of information on why. First of all, we should know more, right? This is one of the things that I've been pushing for a while. Is these are the kinds of things that we should be studying, like who gets injured, why did they get injured, what are the genetics, what are the factors. Like if we could look into that, we could maybe find some sort of patterns, and maybe we could figure out like there's a certain genetics for this certain vaccine or whatever it is that creates a higher susceptibility to having a problem. But you have to admit that they have problems in the first place before you can even study who gets those issues. So I think that's the first issue. But it's certainly not going to be simple, right? There's so many things that are going to go into it. I mean, certainly genetics plays a factor, and then your environment, so what you're surrounded, and then just how you get the vaccine. So maybe it goes in the wrong, goes in the vein, goes into artery vaccine, goes in the wrong place. Maybe that vaccine that you actually got wasn't manufactured exactly correctly, so there's some sort of contaminant in there, or it's more aluminum or more whatever in there that causes you to have an issue, or it's just bad luck. I mean, I don't think we know all the answers, but certainly all of these things are going to factor in. I mean, maybe you were sick on the day you got a vaccine. You already had some genetic susceptibility. You got a vaccine with a higher, whatever in it, just by accident. Who knows? Who knows what the reason is that some people have a reaction? But certainly you do. I mean, someone takes Tylenol, you could die, right? Like people have allergic reactions to peanuts. You walk by a peanut and you whiff it and you could die. So everyone's different. But most people seem to tolerate them in the short term pretty well. In the long term, I think that's what's really up for debate.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. I mean, I think for anything, like you said, there's multiple different causes and different reasons that are likely impossible to understand fully.
I think it's possible. Maybe not fully, but I think if we studied it in 10 years or 20 years, we could have a much better understanding of the main risk factors for a child who's going to have a reaction. Maybe there's a genetic susceptibility. Who knows? Like you could pick the top 10 side effects, and you could just watch the genetics over and over and over again, and you could probably pick up some patterns over time. I think that's possible.
And do you think those studies will be done, like with the new, with Secretary Kennedy in there? Like, is there anything happening behind the scenes that you're aware of that there is a potential that we might start seeing some of those legitimate studies being done?
It's hard. I mean, I know that he's more interested in it, but getting people to actually do it is always difficult. Anything that he does, there's going to be a lot of pushback on. I know he's certainly pushing for some stuff. I don't know what they're actually studying or what they're funding. The problem with a lot of this research is it takes a long time to do it right and very expensive. Yeah. So if this has to be made a priority, it has to be made as important. And I don't think for doctors this is the priority right now. They think it's safe. So therefore, there's no reason to go put all this effort into studying it to find a problem. And pharma's never going to do it, because why are they going to be like, well, let's spend $1 billion to see if we can find a problem on our product? Like, they're not going to do that. Yeah. So it has to be us. So the only way it's ever going to happen is if the CDC or NIH or something like that makes it a priority and starts funding some studies, or maybe some other countries do, or a bunch of philanthropists get together and they decide, okay, well, I really have a concern about vaccines and autism, therefore we're gonna fund the vaccine autism study. And even if you do that, it's gonna take 10, 20 years. Like you can't do that short term. And you can look back, you can look at the research, and I hope they do. I hope more people pull from the databases that we already have. But ultimately, none of that's going to convince doctors. It's only going to be prospective studies, and only a few of them. So that's what would have to be done to really change things in the long run. And I think most things are in balance over time. So eventually, yeah, I think it'll be done. Maybe somebody really prominent is going to have a bad reaction. Something's going to happen that's going to push the needle over the edge to make people aware of it, because there are for sure more vaccine injuries than doctors give credit for. And I don't think that vaccines have zero to do with autism. And I think that over time that's going to come out. What or how much it's related, I don't know. But I do think that there are just too many stories from too many parents who all went in to get a vaccine. They're not anti-vaxxers. For some reason, you called them an anti-vaxxer after. Their kid had a reaction. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe it's not, but there are just too many coincidences at this point to say that it 0% affects chronic disease. I don't think that's true. I think we need to figure out how much of a percentage and why it happens.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So one of the things that I'd like to do with my guests is to have you answer some questions from our social media community. So I put the post out there to have them fire away with some questions. Are you okay with answering some of those?
Sure.
All right. You can make this as rapid fire or as lengthy as you want to. So question number 1, do you have any advice on the best way to navigate the system when you choose to refuse vaccinations or prescriptions for that matter? Is there a good way to ask honest and important questions and express concerns without angering your doctor?
I think the most important factor for this question is really to find a doctor you can have discussions with, because it really depends on the doctor. There are certainly lots of practitioners out there that are open to having conversations, and there are some that aren't. And if you are somebody who, let's say, doesn't want to do vaccines or has more questions about it, and you go to your doctor and they're not willing to discuss it with you, that's not the right doctor for you. I don't think you can convince a doctor to have a conversation with you. You want to find one that's open to it. And if they're not willing to have that discussion, that's not the right doctor for you. Just find a different doctor. So to me, the way to navigate it is to find someone that you can be open with. They don't have to agree with you on everything, but at least you should be able to ask your questions, and they should not judge you, and they should answer them to the best of their ability, and they can totally disagree with you, but they should just at least be able to answer you those questions. So to me, that's the way to navigate that, is to understand that you have choice. And I think a lot of people don't feel like they have choice, and they forget that they're in charge. And if you're at a practice where they're not even willing to have that discussion, then just if you want to have that discussion, don't go there. If you want to do the CDC schedule and you don't care, great. You can go to whichever doctor that's open to that. But if you want to do something different and your practice is going to kick you out if you even ask a question about it and maybe want to go slow, well, that's just not the right practice for you. You're not the right patient for them. They're not the right doctor for you. That's fine. Everyone's different. I might not be the right doctor for somebody who is extraordinarily pro-vaccine and never wants anyone in the practice that, does a slow schedule. Then my practice is not going to be right for them, because I don't force people to do things and I have patients that don't. That's okay. I don't, you want people that want to be there.
Yeah, and I'm always amazed how people are so upset and want to fight against their doctor that is attempting to kick them out of their practice. And that's always my advice. I'm like, just find a new doctor.
Right.
You're not going to change them. So next question. I've heard many authorities use the mantra, it's unethical to do double-blind, randomized, placebo-driven studies. Have you heard that, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's a tough one because, going back to what we were talking about before with the placebo studies, so for the vaccines that are on the market, they weren't necessarily done in that way originally. So now we're kind of stuck with those vaccines because you would say, well, the vaccines have been proven to be effective. Therefore, we want to decrease the risks for our children, and therefore it would be unethical to not give some kids those vaccines and just to watch them over time. And there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, there's certainly ethics involved. And when you're doing a double-blind study, basically meaning that nobody knows what they're getting or not getting, you're not going to ethically give people vaccines that don't want them, and you're not going to ethically not give people vaccines that don't want them. So it makes it tough to do that kind of study for vaccines that are on the market. You could certainly do them for vaccines that are totally new. If there's never been anything on the market before with a new vaccine, they should be done that way. They should be done with an inert placebo. That should be a requirement. The FDA or CDC should never approve a new vaccine for the childhood schedule unless it's been done that way. We just never required it. So there's nothing unethical about that. But the real questions around the vaccines that have been on the market before, and yes, there are some ethical concerns. To me, the solution would be open studies. So studies where you study vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids, and you allow people to decide what group they're in. You get to choose if you want to get vaccines. You get to choose if you don't get vaccines. If you decide later on you want to get a vaccine, no one's going to stop you from doing it. And you follow kids in that way. It's not the best possible study you could do, like a double-blind study, but it's still really good. Still following kids forward. You can still look at vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. And that's what I think we need. I think that, to me, is the solution to a lot of the concerns moving forward. Is I think there's no reason it's unethical to not give kids vaccines that aren't going to get them anyways. And if they're willing to be studied, then great. And obviously there's some potential confounders there in terms of people that are not want to get vaccinated might be slightly different, and certainly most likely are, than people that are willing to get vaccines, but ultimately it's still a good study. I think those are the kind of things that should be done moving forward when we're talking about safety, is doing those open studies where people can choose.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Third question. Do you believe most pediatricians are following what are considered to be the 4 pillars of informed consent?
No, not usually. I mean, not when it comes to vaccines. I think that their informed consent involves allowing people to say no, right? I mean, informed consent is basically providing information and then allowing patients to make that decision. And for many, many practices in pediatrics, they kick you out if you don't decide to do it. And it's not the CDC required schedule, it's CDC recommended schedule. And so you should be able to take in information and make a decision that you feel is right for you, even if they don't agree with that. Informed consent goes through the risks versus the benefits. And realistically, to do that properly really would take way longer than any visit you would have. Most doctors wouldn't even know most of the information anyways. I mean, even I have written a book on it, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I don't know to give you fully informed consent, but at least I try to do my best. But I think most doctors don't know a lot of this information, so it wouldn't even be possible to give full informed consent. But let's just say that they did know everything there was to know about vaccines. I mean, how long would that take, Informed consent, it would just start by reading a book, right? That's how long it would take. There's so much information. So you can't truly give informed consent. You give, kind of, I guess, a version of that in medicine, but the 3-minute visits doesn't really give you the time to sit with a patient and go through it. And to me, for actual visits, informed consent for me means answering all their questions to the best of my ability.
Which, I mean, every doctor should do, but I think the problem is, of course, that most doctors don't have the answers like you do. And that's where I think so many people are just waiting for the system to change. They're waiting to find the perfect doctor, when really the answer comes with, I think, self-education and reading a book like yours over and over and over again, listening to it multiple times like I've done, where then you do feel confident in the questions that you would need to ask. And you don't have to have a doctor tell you about what decision to make and what are the side effects and what are the benefits and all of that. You can educate yourself and make your own decisions before you even go into that practice.
I think that's the way to go. I mean, even for someone with my practice, I can't spend 6 hours with every patient going through everything there is to know with vaccines. That's just not the way that it is. I can answer your questions, but you're gonna use your time much more wisely by being educated yourself. I think that for me, one of the other goals is obviously just to provide a foundation. It doesn't have to be my book, but I think if you're going to read books, you want to read a couple of different perspectives. You want to get a lay of the land. You want to understand the diseases. You want to understand the vaccines, what's in them, what are the controversies. And that's, how I tried to lay out my book. But ultimately, that's what I think you need to know. So that way you have an understanding of what's going on and what the concerns are. And then you can start to ask your questions based on that. If you have to go in and just talk to your doctor about vaccines, there's no way you're going to understand the landscape in 3 minutes. I mean, it's really, you're going to get yes, the vaccines are safe. We recommend them. They will decrease diseases. You should do it, right? That's basically what you're going to get out of going to the doctor's office in general. You can talk about, okay, what are the side effects? Seizure and Guillain-Barré syndrome and arm pain and rash. And that's really all the time you have. Even for me, I don't have 4 hours stuck to every patient with everything. They have to know what they would want to know, and I'll answer any questions that they can ask me. And sometimes we'll set up vaccine consults where, patients will just do a telemedicine and we'll sit down for half an hour and talk about things. But even then, there's just so much information, and there's so much more than I can put in a book or that I even know. I mean, and I'm just one person. You shouldn't just take my word for it. You should read different people, listen to different people and try to formulate your decision based on what you think is right for you. And nobody knows everything when it comes to vaccines. So I think, unfortunately, yes, you have to get educated on this topic. You should just be able to go to the CDC website and get information, but that's just not how it is. I think you need multiple different perspectives. And if you want to be someone who's educated and wants to consider not doing the regular, if you want to do the regular schedule, fine, that's easy. Just do that. But if you want to be informed, then you're going to have some reading to do.
Nutridyne is my number one choice for the vast majority of my family supplements. I'm a huge fan of nearly everyone taking what I call the foundational 4 supplements: a multivitamin, a spore-based probiotic, omega-3 fish oil, and vitamin D3 with K2. The large majority of people are deficient in many of these nutrients, and they are the building blocks to gut health, immune system strength, brain health, heart health, and every other aspect of your health. Don't fall into the trap of chasing symptoms with supplements, and instead start to rebuild your health with the foundational 4. We partnered with Nutridyne so that you can save 15% on every order, and not just with the foundational 4, but all of your other supplements as well. Go to foundationalhealth365.com, click on Shop Brands, and then Nutridyne, set up your account, and you're all set to automatically get 15% off all orders. Now let's get back to the Foundational Health Podcast.
Which brings me to the next question, which is, does spreading out the schedule of vaccines, in your experience, your opinion, based on the data, whatever, does spreading out the schedule of vaccines help to reduce side effects?
We don't know. It's like, we don't know because that's not how it's studied. All we know is the way that it's studied. Once again, that's the right question, right? That is the question. Not all research has to be vaccine good or bad. It could be, well, if we do fewer vaccines on one day, does that decrease your risk of side effects? If we push it off, if we do fewer of them, how does that affect you long term? I would think logically, the fewer things you do on any one day, the lower the risk of having a side effect in the short term. But I don't know. I think that's just common sense to me. Like if you touch a little bit of lead, you'll probably be okay. But if you drink a whole bunch of it, you'll die. So yeah, I think the more of any sort of chemical or toxin that you're going to be exposed to, then the more chance you have a reaction. Now, even if you do all the vaccines on the schedule, if that is so small of an amount of whatever in your body, then it doesn't cause any issues. Okay, that's a reasonable argument to make. But I don't personally see any problem spacing it out if you are willing to do it. And that's what a lot of people do in my practice. The recommendations are for public health. There are a lot of people that can't get to the doctor very frequently. It's difficult for them to get there, so they do as many things on one day as possible. If you don't have those issues, if you just want to do one a day and you come in this week and then come in 2 weeks from now and get the next one, I don't have a problem with that. If that's what makes somebody comfortable to do it, there's not really a lot of increased risk from the diseases if you get one vaccine today and one vaccine 2 weeks from now. I mean, unless you happen to get that disease in the next 2 weeks. But if that's what makes people comfortable to do it, then that works for me. I mean, I want people to do whatever their comfort is, and if doing one a day makes them comfortable to kind of work their way through, to me, that's fine. And so that's where, again, personal decision-making comes in, because for some people, a few extra visits is totally fine by them, and for other people, that's impossible.
That also makes perfect sense. So this is a question that I get a lot. I know there's a lot of confusion around tetanus. So the specific question from this woman is, what can you tell me about tetanus when it comes to living on a farm versus somebody that doesn't live on a farm? Is there a way to prevent it if you're not vaccinated against tetanus? Is the tetanus vaccine effective? Do we have any research on that?
So tetanus, one of the things that is what people think about tetanus is you get it from like a rusty nail or something like that. You get it from rust. Well, it's just not true. I don't know who the PR team was for rust, but they got a bad rap. I mean, it has nothing to do with that, really. It really has to do with something that's in the soil. Usually it's in the soil around animals. So that's why more likely on farms. So it's very, very rare that you get tetanus in a city. Mostly you would get it somewhere more rural because you get it, let's say, from cows and manure and animals when you're on a farm. And so when you're out on a farm, there's lots of metal and rust. And so if you get a deep puncture wound, then that is how you might get tetanus. So if it happens to be there. So that's where you get the rusty nail kind of theory, because if you're out on a farm and you step on a nail, that's the kind of environment where if it goes deep and you close it off, then the tetanus could grow if it happens to be there. There are only a few cases a year, so it's not very common. It's very unlikely for you to get it. It's extraordinarily unlikely for you to get it from a regular old cut when you're in the city. And you see it all the time. You go to the ER, kid fell, skateboarding, and got to cut off some cement. And then they're like, oh, you don't have your tetanus shot. We need to do it. That's not really how you get tetanus. Is it theoretically possible? Yes, it's theoretically possible. Generally, if you get a cut and you clean it after, that's all you need to do. You're not going to get tetanus. If you live on a farm, then it's a little bit more risk. There is no specific prevention other than the vaccine. The vaccine works very well. You're really not going to get tetanus almost ever if you get the vaccine. So that's one of the reasons why it's so rare, but it's just not that common in cities. So for you who, if you live in a big city, you're probably not going to get tetanus.
Okay. Are naturopathic and homeopathic vaccines safe and effective alternatives to Big Pharma's version? Probably an impossible question to answer, but...
Yeah, I don't think it's impossible. I mean, the research on homeopathic vaccines shows that it doesn't give antibodies, right? So it doesn't work in the same way. If you want to support your body, if you want to do them, I think that's fine. They're safe. I mean, they're not dangerous. I don't think they protect you like a vaccine does. So I don't think you should be replacing those for vaccines. If you want to do them to support your vaccines, if you want to do them and you're choosing not to do vaccines just to get a little additional potential support, fine. I've never seen any research show that they actually work in the way that you would want them to work. I mean, the point of a vaccine would be you get a little bit of a dose of something so that way your body knows how to react to it. And then when you get exposed to it in the future, you're not going to have, you're not going to get that disease. You're not going to have the serious symptoms. I don't think the homeopathic vaccines do that because they don't have enough of a dose that your body creates an antibody response. Maybe a little bit, but that's not at least what the research shows. Most homeopathy is such a small amount that it's more energetic, I would say, than creating antibodies. In medicine, we do things like allergy shots, low dose, which is kind of like homeopathy, right? And that does work, but it's a little bit higher doses. So I don't know that there's no benefit to it. Certainly a lot of places around the world use homeopathy a lot more than we use in America, but I wouldn't replace it. I think if you want to do it, go for it. I'm not concerned about safety. They're very safe. But efficacy, I don't know how much it would protect you. I wouldn't consider that, I did a homeopathic, therefore I'm protected from tetanus. I don't know that that's true.
Vitamin K, that's another one that I get so many questions on. So something that you recommend on that first day of life, or?
Yeah, vitamin K is, I think, the toughest one for most parents because there's certainly a benefit to it, right? There's no question about it. Bleeding for a newborn baby, if you get a vitamin K deficient bleeding, you never know who's going to be the baby that's going to get it. It's very rare. It's like 1 in 10,000, but it certainly used to happen. And if your baby has a brain bleed, they have a really good chance of dying or having very serious complications because you don't usually catch it right away. You catch it after they start having symptoms, and you never really know who's going to be that baby. Certainly if you have some risk factors, that's different, but most people, if it happens to them, there wasn't really any risk factors, and they have bleeding. So it works really well. When you get the vaccine, there's almost a 0% chance you're going to have that bleeding, but the risk to begin with was quite small. There's also oral vitamin K. So I think if you're choosing to not get the vaccine, then oral vitamin K is a good alternative. It still works very well. A lot of countries around the world use it for kids that are healthy and have no potential vitamin K concerns. So vitamin K concerns for a parent would be a mom is taking a medication that affects their blood clotting, or maybe they have a clotting disorder in their family. Those are much higher risk patients. But for the average kid who's born, if they don't have a complicated birth, then the oral drops also actually work very well. They decrease your risk very significantly, not as much as the vaccine, but almost as much for a healthy kid. So a lot of the places around the world offer that. We just don't. But you can do it yourself. So I think of the things you give, this one has, I would say, pretty low risk of side effects comparatively because there aren't as many chemicals or toxins in that vaccine. And, it's still synthetic, but at least it's a vitamin versus something else. And you definitely have some benefit for it. So I think parents, if they're going to choose to do one thing in those first few months, that's often the one thing that they would do. But some people are totally natural and just don't want to do anything. And that's a choice. You have to understand what your risk is. And your risk is going to be somewhere between 1 in 1,000 to 1 in 10,000, you could have some bleeding. And that's just the way things used to be. So you can decide if you're willing to take that risk or not.
Okay, so just a few more here. Do you have a resource that you recommend for healthcare workers and others that are trying to navigate everything from vaccine law to vaccine waivers, people's rights, all of that?
Again, I think you have to read multiple different things. If I was going to say one person, I think Aaron Siri, the lawyers, he has some great information when it comes to personal choice. His book is really good when it comes to vaccine law and research vaccines. Amen. I respect him a lot. So I think as someone who's been involved with this for a long time, he's probably the go-to resource in terms of informed consent, I would say.
Okay, awesome. We'll definitely have a link to that in our show notes as well. What are your thoughts on outbreaks, such as measles outbreaks and others that we hear about? Do children and adults need this vaccine really at any time, but especially during an outbreak?
To me, personally, that's not the way that I frame it. I don't frame it as need. I just frame it as, do you want the benefits? Do you want to be protected? The measles vaccine works. It works very well. You get 2 vaccines, you're most likely not going to get measles. It's 98% effective. It's something that we have a good vaccine for that you can protect children from that disease. The question is, do you want that benefit? Do you want that benefit at whatever risk there may be? Most kids that get measles will be totally fine, right? And I think with measles, we're taught to kind of be very, very scared of it. And that's kind of what the media does, because there's one case of a kid that gets really sick, and then you hear about it over and over again. The reality for measles is most kids, it's mild, right? Most kids, if you get 100,000 kids, the vast majority of them are going to have very mild symptoms. Worst case would be a bad pneumonia in general. That's the thing that we're most worried about, but that's not most kids. Most kids do fine. And before we even had a vaccine, only a couple hundred kids died when there were millions of cases. So do we want any kids to die? Of course not. But when we're talking about putting that into context, tens of thousands of people die every year from the flu, and we're not walking around, freaked out, worried about the flu. Like, people die of diseases all the time. There are kids that are very sick already that get whatever infection, and that pushes them over the edge. So I think it's important to be informed. I think you need to understand what your risks are. I don't think you need to be extraordinarily worried about measles, but I do think it can cause severe disease, and so it's something to be aware of. And if you do want that protection, there is a vaccine that works really well, and your kid won't get measles, almost for sure. If you get that vaccine, you're taking whatever risk comes along with getting that vaccine, and that's what you have to decide if you're comfortable with.
And my wife and I, just based on all of the research that we had done, her background in the vaccine world, we chose not to vaccinate our 3 children, so they don't have any shots. And again, people ask, oh, is that what you recommend for other people? Like, no, it's really what you talk about. It is coming to your own decisions. But as a result of that, our first daughter did get measles. And we're pretty sure she had 2 different forms of measles at 2 different times. But again, it was pretty mild, almost like a chicken pox type thing. And she got through it and she was just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen kids with measles and they've been fine. I mean, it's possible you get really sick. Like, that's obviously possible. You can go to the hospital. Kids do go to the hospital. So this is something to be aware of. But you don't see the, 999 out of 100 cases where the kid is just totally fine, has a cold. Most times you wouldn't even know because they were exposed to someone with measles. They get a little cold. They get a bit of a rash. Nobody knows that it's measles, and the kid just gets better. I mean, that's what happens the vast majority of the time. You only hear about the really sick kids. And I think it's important to be aware that that's possible, but I don't think it makes sense to walk around being terrified of these things. I mean, personally, as a doctor, I've seen kids get more sick from RSV than I've seen from measles. You see kids get really sick from the flu. Like, I'm not particularly worried about measles. The concern with measles is just very contagious. So it's so contagious that everybody gets it if they're not vaccinated. That's just the reality of measles. But if, on the individual level, most kids that get measles is just a cold. That, I think, sometimes helps parents to kind of put that in context. Like, yes, you can get it. If there's one vaccine you're going to get, it's probably going to be a measles vaccine. I think that most doctors, if they're going to pick just one, that's the one that we know is very effective. And you certainly can get really sick with measles. You can get sick with any disease, right? All the diseases that you protect against, you can get really sick. But for most kids, it's not a terrifying death sentence disease. Most kids, if they're healthy, will be just fine.
Good to know. Okay, so besides there being more vaccines on today's schedule, which of course everybody's aware of, are there other differences besides just more vaccines? Is there like ingredient differences? Anything that else that has changed?
I mean, mostly it's fairly similar. I mean, certainly some of the vaccines have changed somewhat over the years. The biggest change would be the thimerosal mercury ingredient, which was in a lot of the vaccines many, 20 years ago and has taken out from really all the vaccines at this point. So for the most part, the main vaccines haven't changed all that much in the last 20 years. Okay. Maybe a little bit here or there, but I'm not aware of like major changes. When some of them first came out, like there was a original rotavirus vaccine, then there were some concerns around it. They took it back, new ones on the market, the original DTP vaccine. Now we have DTaP vaccine. There are more kinds of flu vaccines. So there are some differences and more, but not major changes recently.
All right. So my last question for you is actually for me. So our slogan here at Foundational Health is make health your hobby. So my question for you is, what are some of the things that you consider to be foundational for you and your family when it comes to staying healthy on a regular basis? And then what are some of the things that you do also as a family to make those foundational things part of your daily life, part of your hobbies?
I would say the biggest thing is eating healthy. So really putting a focus and spending money on getting the healthiest possible food, meaning fresh food. So trying to go to farmers markets and the stores where we can get things that are local and fresh as much as possible. Trying to integrate that into family life. So involving our kids, having them come help pick things out, help cooking, preparing, having a garden at home. I mean, I think just understanding where food comes from and then getting the freshest possible ingredients, I think that makes a huge difference. Being conscious with every purchase of health, I think, is really important for us and really important for everybody. So you're always reading the labels, you're always thinking about health, always trying to minimize the chemicals. That's a big thing. And then just getting outside, lots of outside time. Not so worried. I mean, our kids don't go to school yet, so just lots of outside time, lots of park time, not so worried about schoolwork. I mean, they still do some, but not so worried about that, and more worried about like, being in nature, being around people, having fun, and trying to minimize stress while being outside. I think all those things make a huge difference. And our kids, knock on wood, barely been sick. A couple days here or there, get over it quickly. Haven't really needed medications at all. So I think that there's something to really focusing on just making sure you get the nutrients that you need and being active, and your body can do most of the rest in general.
Awesome recommendations. That's exactly what we do with our family, and that's been our experience with our 3 kids as well. Certainly they get sick just like everybody else, but it's been pretty minimal, and they get over it without the help of any medications. We're going to have links to all of your resources in our show notes, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time for this critically important discussion. But outside of those links, is there one place that you recommend, or a few places where people can follow you, where they can get more information, even outside of your book?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks for having this discussion. I know it's a crazy topic, but I'm glad that we're doing it. I guess the best places would be Instagram or X at Dr. Joel Gator, or Substack, same title as the book, Between a Shot and a Hard Place. And it's been really exciting to see that even the Substack blow up. There's over 100,000 people. It's usually in the top 20 on health in Substack, which I'm surprised at. But I guess, more and more people are just interested in talking about health and talking about vaccines and continuing that conversation. So, past the book, talking about vaccines and what's going on. So it's been amazing to see how that's exploded. So yeah, I'd say the Substack, Instagram, X.
Yeah, that is awesome to hear. And I really do think it's a sign of our times right now that people are starting to ask the right questions.
Thank you for listening to the Foundational Health Podcast. As always, if you would like to learn more about making health your hobby, visit our website at foundationalhealth365.com and follow me on Facebook at Kevin Schultz, DC, Foundational Health.